Well, welcome to the Fire Authority meeting. I'd like to begin by welcoming members of the public and press who are watching via the live stream of this meeting. The Fire Authority allows filming and photography at its public meetings, of which this is one, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask though that everyone present please turn off your mobile phones, either to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. There's no fire alarm test for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we'll make our way as quickly as possible via the nearest available fire exits. The muster point is in the car park to the rear of the building. Very well. Item 1, Dawn, could you report any apologies for absence, please?
Chair, we've received apologies from councillors Bond, Over and Ray, and I believe we're also missing Councillor Atkins at the moment. I'm not sure whether he's late.
Thank you. I believe we are expecting Councillor Atkins, but we may have to change the record to absent if he does not turn up. Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No, thank you very much. The minutes. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 16th of June as an accurate record. If any member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes, can they please do so now by raising their hand? I see no hands, so that we will take that as carried unanimously. And on that basis, recommend to approve the minutes. Agreed? Very well, I will sign the minutes. Item 3, Chair's announcements. In my announcements last time this year, I was highlighting the fact that our combined fire control had celebrated its 10th anniversary in October 2021. In these announcements, however, I would like to start by thanking on behalf of the whole authority, not only those of our people employed in the service, but everyone employed for their contribution, no matter how large or small, to provide a first-class response to the major incidents declared over the summer months. A staggering 1,000 incidents were dealt with in July alone, when normally the fire service would only expect 300. The way in which the sector responded to the extreme conditions has been commented on nationally, and I can only hope that it provides further evidence, if any were required, that our people deserve to be appropriately recognised. Those of you that attended the Cambridgeshire County Council meeting on the 18th of October may recall that I brought to Council's attention a number of items, including how the service was celebrating World Menopause Day and updates on the Operational Response Review project, as well as the Home Office White Paper consultation, the latest inspection results, and more detailed information on the major incidents. For those who were not in attendance, further information can be found on the County Council website, and I will arrange for the link to be circulated and included in the minutes. Whilst the Chief Fire Officer and I, on your behalf, continue to lobby local MPs and other stakeholders of influence on key challenges facing the service, several issues continue to cause us grave concern. I would hope that the agenda we have today will allow for open and honest discussion to help ensure we can navigate through them and agree on the actions required to minimise their impact. And finally, I should add that sadly, a former member of this authority passed away, Ralph Butcher. He served this authority for a good 10 years. And I know that many here will have served with him. May I ask Councillor Jamil to say a couple of words?
Chair, can we start by having a 1 minute silence? I think that would be appropriate right now.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to call it the pleasure of working or being on the authority with Ralph from his time from 2013 basically to 2017. My recollection is someone who was actually committed to the fire authority. He was one of those ones who would just listen to the debate and at the end would ask what I would say were the most pertinent, open and honest questions. He always had the best interest of the fire authority. And when he wasn't here, he actually was missed. So therefore, you know, I want to pass on our thanks to his family for the years of service that he did, and also recognize the fact that he was one of those ones who always worked to keep the fire authority going. And therefore, I think 1 minute silence was appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, may we move to the first substantive item on the agenda, Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Compliance Report. Who would like to speak to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the report that's been circulated is the annual Equality, Diversity and Inclusion update. The reporting period is April 2021 to March 2022, so the previous year. So anything that we've started on or improved upon then isn't in the report, but I might refer to it in my update now. During the reporting period, we were still coming out of the pandemic, and as an emergency service, we still had restrictions in place. So during the report, referrals are made to the pandemic and the fact that our internal and external community activity was still reduced in that period. So I'm going to give a quick summary of the things that I see in the report in terms of what went well and what we're working on now, and then happy to take any questions if that's okay. So what went well if we look through the report? I think there is still a really positive story around our recruitment and retention of female employees at 24% as a fire and rescue service. So, and we're continuing to increase the number of women we have in operational roles, particularly on call, which is now up to 9.6% and 24 women, and more female managers. So we have more in on call than we've had before as well. We're the 6th highest fire and rescue service for the percentage of women in our service at 24%, and that's by a margin. So actually we're kind of joint 3rd with a few other services, unless you want to get into tenders of all places about it. Female leavers that you see in this report are due to the Great Resignation. So you can see, I think, throughout the numbers in the report, the impact of the Great Resignation post-pandemic phase on our numbers. All the women who went on maternity leave returned to work. So I think we still have a really good news story there. That reflects then in our gender pay gap. So the gender pay gap mean is now the lowest it has been since we started reporting, and is 11.8%, which compares very favourably to other fire and rescue services. As the chair has already mentioned, the menopause working group continues to be a fantastic success. It is attended by men and women from across ops and non-operational parts of the service. We call them menopause cafes. They're for peer support, but they're also educational. We've had external speakers, we've created a risk assessment, and we did do a survey as well to all women about menopause and menstruation. And that work has really moved on since this reporting period. We're now trialling portable welfare facilities on appliances for longer incidents, and leading on this topic nationally for the NFCC. Neurodiversity, we are a disability confident employer, and we have an improved process in place in recruitment now to offer supportive conversations that enable us to explore reasonable adjustments, and then that continues if somebody is hired into a full neurodiversity assessment and passport process, which is best practice. And this has proved a really valuable, positive intervention and discussion with people, in particular with probationary firefighters, to support them on their apprenticeships. In this reporting period, we also did the EQIA project, where we reviewed our policy and process and have trained over 85 people now across the service to complete EQIAs to a really high quality. And we used the NFCC's preferred supplier, Mackenzie's, to do this. So we now have a new online process that's being used. EQIA reminders are on our meeting agendas, and the quality of the EQIAs that are now coming through have really improved. They go to the senior team to review and approve them as well, so that we have a check-in process. Accessibility. So one of the things we've also done is reviewed our website and made lots of improvements to ensure the content is accessible to all. And we've trained employees who create our website content to ensure they're considering accessibility requirements going forward. Firebreak. So now we're out of the pandemic, Firebreak has started up again and continues to be really in demand for children most at risk of exclusion. The Firebreak Pumps new inclusive wrap is also very popular for community engagement as well. And Safe and Wells, we're now back to pre-pandemic levels of activity and did 5,138 Safe and Well visits in the reporting period and used the new NFCC online home safety checker. So those are the highlights as I see them. What we're focusing on at the moment, though, since this report was run, the next step for us, we're really looking forward to the Census 2021 data, the demographic data coming out, which is going to come out in stages. But we want to use that to really improve the engagement with minority ethnic groups in our community. So we have started community engagement activity back up again. We did this summer. And when we have the Census 21 data, we're going to build dashboards for each station to understand the demographic mix in each area, to really focus community safety, engagement and positive action activities. So then we can look at Black, Asian, mixed, Eastern European and Gypsy, Irish Traveller, Roma community. So the full view across our county. And then each department can have a look, whether that's recruitment, safety, community consultation, and we can use that data to plan our work going forward in a really robust way, rather than data that's out of date. We do continue to get a really diverse pool of applicants when we advertise vacancies. We're now reintroducing community assessors into our interview panels again to get a better understanding, to see if there is anything they can spot about our process that we can improve, and also just to mitigate against any unconscious bias. We've recently done a full review of our last whole time campaign, and there's nothing in our data that would suggest any discrimination, but it's always good to have a fresh pair of eyes on these things. Recruitment, I think you can see in the numbers there that we did not run a whole time or control recruitment campaign during the reporting period. It's mainly been professional support, and that is really challenging at the moment due to the Great Resignation. There's 470,000 vacancies across the UK, mostly in the private sector, and they're offering much larger salaries. So due to cost of living increases, people will leave, and it will be hard to replace them. And that will have an impact on the diversity of our workforce, which we're keeping an eye on. In response to that, we have reviewed our professional support recruitment processes and our diversity tracking. We're offering flexible hybrid working and part-time working in our professional support vacancies. We're updating our website and our recruitment material as well, because we really want to make sure that people in our community understand the fantastic positive culture that we have and how open and inclusive we are to be attractive to them. Okay, that's my update. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that excellent report and lots of very encouraging results. Questions, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for a very clear, well, very concise, and I do certainly on paper see it's very robust. I enjoyed reading that. What I want to pick up on is, as you spoke about, is the menopause and community inclusion. So one part of it, you're talking about, you want to explore topics such as the menopause with local community groups. I would be really interested to see how this would work, and certainly within Huntingdonshire District Council, it's something that I've pushed for in the respect of menopause, they've taken up on the menopause pledge, but I would like to see sort of a policy coming in within our district council. What I would like, if possible, if it would be something we could do, if you are looking at community groups to work with, alongside HGC with our community groups, is to sort of link up and go through policies and understand the way you're working with the policy of the menopause and perimenopause. So it'd be something I'd be really interested in working alongside you all with.
That would be great. Absolutely. Happy to.
Thank you. Any other, that's a very helpful suggestion. Any other? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you. Just very quickly, can I confirm that representatives or champions of equality and inclusion had an opportunity for input into this report? I believe it's Councillor Jamil and you? Yeah, Mandy. Yeah. So yes, I see you're nodding your head. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Slatter and then Kindersley.
As much as anything, it's a comment. I went to my first fire break passing out parade and met other colleagues with me who have seen them before, but I was very impressed, and I was able to take a video which didn't have any faces in it, which I shared on my local Facebook, and just let people know how we are engaging with young people. And these are young people who, even if they don't come close to carry it forward in a career, well, I'm absolutely sure have been greatly benefited from their participation. I hadn't realised just what was involved in fire break. I'd love one in my division, but we all have to wait in line. And I'm very glad that is something that is self-funding, and therefore, as long as we get the right partners in the schools and help from the firefighters themselves, who clearly give up a lot of time and effort, it can't be easy. And I do hope we can carry on with those and even make them even more widespread. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions. The first is, we had an officer appointed who was working in the community, particularly ethnic diverse community in Peterborough, in order to encourage people to apply and with a focus on female applicants. Do we still have that officer, and is there anything perhaps to add to that? The second point I wanted to explore was that of the Great Resignation, which I have to admit I had to Google to see what the Great Resignation actually was. And if that is going to have a knock-on impact on our gender pay gap, because the report ends obviously with a bit on the gender pay gap, and it sounds positive, the direction that we're traveling in, but I just think perhaps we ought to be forewarned if you think there's going to be, if one thinks there's going to be any changes in that.
So the positive action officer, I think the person you're referring to did leave, but we have replaced. So they've picked up that work and that continues. So the recruitment project I referred to earlier is the project that the positive action officer is on with the recruitment team, and links in with the work we do in community engagement. So it all interlinks, yeah, how we work together collaboratively. I think it's too early to tell with the gender pay gap, if I'm honest, because we're only a few months into this year. I can see, looking at the numbers, where you're coming from, so I will keep an eye on it. At the moment, I think the numbers still look okay, that we wouldn't go the other way, but I will keep an eye on it. It's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other suggestions or comments? Thank you. Are members happy to agree the content of the report? I see nodding. Yes, thank you very much. We are in agreement with it without changing it. Thank you. The next substantive item on the agenda is the annual report and statement of assurance. Who would like to speak to that? John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. First of all, thing to note is it's very much a draft report, and it's here for your approval today. Just to put it into context, this is for the year 2021 to 2022. And so if we remember back to April 2021, this is just when we came out the second period of COVID lockdown. And we also underwent our second HMIC FRS inspection at the same time. So obviously quite a challenging time for us. And then takes us through to April 2022, when free COVID testing stopped. So for the majority of this time, we were working under some form of COVID precautions for the whole year. But we also started to gradually switch things back on as part of the return into what will become a new normal and the new working conditions we find ourselves in now. The format of this document is slightly different to previous years, as it's going to be an accessible Word document. So at this stage, the graphs and charts haven't been included, but they will be in the final designed version, which will also have photos, etc., as you will have seen in previous reports. On page 10 of the PDF, you'll see the table with details of fire authority members. Photos will be added as part of the design process. The same will apply for the chief officers. The summaries in the operational community safety, people and value for money, an excellent section as detailed how we performed against our RMP action plan. All of that performance data has been brought forward to previous fire authority meetings. So hopefully you should all be cited on that anyway. The report also contains our HMIC FRS inspection report, as that came through at the end of 2021. The data, most of the data included has always, again, it's been previously presented to the fire authority. The People Excellence case study needs finishing as a team. We're waiting for further information to finish it off, and it hasn't been received before the fire authority paper deadline. The financial information and audit information is draft only, as we've not had the audit back yet. We'd like to have to publish with the draft information as a final outcome, and may not be known until January, when we will amend and republish the report as it comes through. Okay. You might want to say something.
Yes, please.
If I can, Chair, actually, we haven't got a timetable at all for our year-end audit yet. What we have been told, it will be in the new year at some point. The auditors are still playing catch up with last year, not for us, but for other local authorities. So I'd be surprised. We may have to go with draft figures.
Thank you.
Thanks, that's all the points I want to bring up. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Who would like to ask any questions? Councillor Bywater.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question really, John, just to say thank you very much. Very detailed report. I think, if a member of the public was reading this, it's a great resume to see what we've done through the year and the hard work that the service and our staff have done throughout the organisation through the year that it covers. I just want to make a comment in relation to Group Commander Simon Thompson doing 44,000 press-ups. That's some achievement. So on public record, well done. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kindersley.
4 is quite an achievement. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully not sounding like a stuck record, but I really like the every year I say how much I like the format. It changes every year and it only gets better. So thank you very much for that. I think it might be an appropriate point to make to thank our monitoring officer in relation to all of the work that she and other colleagues put into the potential transfer of governance to the Police and Crime Commissioner, which members will recall occupied a very great deal of our time, effort, and not inconsiderable amount of public money. We haven't really had the opportunity to thank her for her efforts in relation to that. There are a number of other things which I think probably will come out in the course of the meeting. But I would want to agree with Mr. Warren that if our audit is not complete, I think it's perfectly acceptable to say this is a draft and to put it into the public facing document. It shouldn't be a particular issue. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm happy to record thanks to our monitoring officer. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I would agree. We caveat that particular part of the report with draft figures and the rest of it. Otherwise, it will be out of date, should we say?
By draft, you mean not finalised through an audit process, but it's not draft in the sense that it's not final figures. Right. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Slatter.
Again, a comment really. I mean, this is a really useful report for anybody on the council. It doesn't have to be on the authority, who wants to be able to show people what the fire and rescue service does manage to do. And it's not just the mainline stuff and the hedge fires and the dramatic stuff that gets on the television news. It's so important though that is. It's also the smaller attention to detail. And I'm glad of the detail in here. Sometimes the reports we read can be a little bit too bland and sort of extracts. But for example, when we upgrade something, the first aid kits, and there's some old ones that are perfectly okay, I'm guessing it's often the firefighters who said, oh, we could use those for the scouts, or oh, we can send those to people working in Ukraine. And that sort of detail, it speaks volumes, I think, of a workforce that is not just working in the fire stations, but so many of them with other jobs out in the community, and they bring that expertise and the contacts and the insights. And I think that's also where the inclusion, the report we have just had about inclusion is on. We can learn so much for people's other employees or places of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I wondered, one of the main variances kind of to the bottom line for the year as I read it were was kind of more money in government grants perhaps than we were expecting when the budget was originally set. I wonder if it's possible just to have a flavour of what those grants were for. You know, were we more successful than we were anticipating in getting those grants, and what's what are our thoughts for this revenue stream over the coming years?
Would you like to handle that?
So predominantly COVID related grants, because that's the years were covered. We weren't expecting them, obviously. And the other secondary part is around collection of business rates. We're in a what we call a localised retention scheme, and as a result, we estimate at the start of the financial year, but depending on what businesses are attracted to the area at any given time, we're allowed to retain a proportion of the growth in and across the county. So that was the second element of it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Are members happy to agree the content of the report? Yes, I see nods. Thank you very much for the very excellent report. So we move to the next item on the agenda, which is the financial business continuity plan. So can I ask the Chief Fire Officer, please, to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. I think,
excuse me, Chris, before sorry, I'm misreading my instructions. I'd like you to introduce it, and then I believe we have a question.
Okay. So would you like to go through the paper and then, okay. Yeah, I think I'd start by saying this. I've been in the fire and rescue service for over 39 years, and this is the most difficult situation I think that I've seen in that time. I've been a principal officer since 2007. Myself and certainly Matthew and a couple of other members of our team have overseen a reduction in our central grant funding of £7 million, a total overall reduction in our budget of around £8 million over that period. And over that time, I mean, to be quite frank, I think in the early days, I remember sitting around the table and we took £1 million from our budget in the first year, and we did it within 3 or 4 months. And if I'm being honest, that was actually quite an easy thing to do, because at the time, I think in terms of resourcing, we were quite well resourced as an organisation. So it wasn't difficult, and we didn't really notice too much difference. Over the following years, we've saved a further, on top of that £1 million, around £7 million. And we've done that without closing any fire stations. We've done that against a backdrop of improving the quality of service that we provided or provide to the community. We've done that by changing shift systems, which it's easy to say, but certainly in the fire and rescue service for operational staff, that's not an easy thing to do. We've done that twice. And that's just the whole time shift system. We've changed all of our shift systems in order to improve the efficiency of the organisation and to drive out savings where we can. And I think the economic situation that we now face as a country, and inevitably as a fire and rescue service, as a public service, it is and will potentially be the most challenging we face, because the reality of the situation is that we have stripped out as much fat as there is in the service, and the service is now operating in a very efficient way, and it's recognised to be efficient, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So thinking about how we can then continue to make what could be some significant savings from the budget is difficult. So over the last 10 years, myself and Matthew in particular have been here throughout that period. We do know the service inside out, and we have worked very hard to identify where we would make savings, and savings that would have the least impact on the organisation. And that work has been ongoing for over 10 years, and it's been refreshed on numerous occasions. And the last refresh commencing early in this year, when we could see the way the situation was going from a financial perspective. And so we've engaged pretty much all of our management team in looking to see how we could downsize aspects of the service and have as little impact on our prevention, protection and response services as we possibly can. So that's just a backdrop against what I'm about to talk to you about. So I'm assuming that all members have read the paper, and I know we've had some discussions about it offline in the lead up to this meeting. So I'll just take you, I guess, through to section 4, just as a starter. And it's just again a reminder, certainly in section 4.1, that this isn't the start of a process, it's a continuation. So we are working against having saved £8 million worth of budget from our revenue income. So back in 2010, our budget was around £30 million a year. In 2022, it's around £31 million. So if you look at the real terms increase that we would have seen in the budget, it would be significantly more. And as I've said earlier, we had a £16 million grant from government each year. We now have £9 million, and that's 12 years later. So that's a significant reduction in our budget. Section 4.2 and 4.3, I've lifted to be, I don't take credit for the words because I lifted them straight from the National Framework for Fire and Rescue Services. So that's the legal background against which we work. And it's very clear when you read that we are expected to aim to be a good fire and rescue service. And we are inspected by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Fire and Rescue Services against a standard. That standard contains 11 areas, which I've added into the appendices of this document. So you can see it isn't just fire appliances and fire engines, it's protection, prevention and response services and all the things that go around making us a good service that can intervene when fires and other emergencies do occur, but also are well equipped to prevent fires and other emergencies happening in the first place. So we must have due regard to what the inspectorate tells us, and we must put in plans place to overcome issues that they identify. And that's something that we've done over 2 iterations of the inspection process. And as it stands, the last inspection round, we received 10 goods out of 11. And the previous inspection round, we were 11 goods out of 11. I can't tell you where we sit in the league tables because obviously everyone looks to see where they are on this round because it's not complete, but we were within the top 4 fire and rescue services across the country, and certainly within that 4 we were the lowest funded of them. So we're a high performing organisation with a relatively low income. So if I just move on to the current situation, and this paper's been sort of amended a number of times along the way because the financial situation, as you know, is changing virtually on a daily basis. And only this afternoon we see that interest rates are rising again to 3% mark. So we can see it's quite a volatile situation. So this, I guess it's still relevant because the purpose of the paper is to reassure members that we're in a position to downsize the organisation depending on what financial situation presents itself, certainly for the rest of this year and into next year. I didn't need that pen. So inflationary pressures, in December last year, we were anticipating that we would be seeing around the 2% mark. So if members recall back to last year when we were looking at budgets, our prediction was we'd be looking around 2% increase. We were thinking there might be a higher level of inflation on some of our utilities. So we'd put aside, I think it was 10% for that. But certainly on other aspects, such as pay inflation, we were looking around the 2% mark. That became very different, I guess, over the last few months, and we've seen things changing, and we now know the cost of living has risen significantly and certainly now is heading up towards the 10% mark. However, as a service, we have to budget in advance of any deals on pay or increases in salary or increases in inflation. So we have to project forward what we think will happen, and 2% was what we projected. And there is a stark reality for us. 2% was pretty much the maximum we could afford, because that equates to the maximum amount we can raise in council tax. And there was a question earlier about grant funding. As I've just said, we've seen our grant funding reduced by £8 million since 2010. And looking at the economic situation at the moment and the government's suggestion that we could be looking around a £40 billion reduction in hole in the budget, of which half of that may need to come from public services, it's hard to see that where we would be getting an increase in grant funding. So it shifts us on to a focus on council tax. And for those of you who aren't aware, 64% of our budget comes from council tax. So it is the larger part of the money that we are able to raise. There's a ceiling on how much we can raise, and that's 2%. And that then equates to the ability for us to pay a 2% increase in pay and absorb around about a 10% increase in other inflationary aspects, because that's quite a small part of the budget that we have. Reserves I put in at 4.5. I think it's important to understand that, and members will be aware of this, that our reserves are not significant as some other fire and rescue services. Certainly, since we've commissioned our new training centre, which we've been looking to build for certainly the last 10 to 15 years, that has brought our usable reserves down to a fairly small sum. So we are looking around £2 million that we have that's unearmarked for anything, and an additional £1 million that's set aside for us to use to transition if we have to move from where we are to a more challenging financial position. It seems a significant sum, but it isn't in the context of the size of the organisation. Section 5, I won't go through, but I think the reason I put it in the report is because I think it's important to reflect back on the amount of change that has gone on in this organisation over the last decade across the whole of the organisation. So lots of reorganisation, reshaping of how we work, improvements in how efficient we are as a service, providing a better level of service to the community, but also lots of changes in terms of reduction. So just from the top of my head, I know that we took approximately 30% reduction in our support staff over the first period of austerity. We took a reduction of about 14% of our operational frontline workforce through changing the shift system. We did the same through our officer corps as well. So we downsized significantly over the last 10 years, but in a way that maintained the effectiveness and efficiency of the organisation. And that's obviously been recognised by the inspectorate. On to section 6. I won't go through the first couple of bits because I think I've just spoken about those. Certainly 6.2 is interesting. So for those of you who don't know, the government does not set a cap on council tax. That was abolished a number of years ago. What the government sets is an excessive, what it deems to be a level above which is excessive. So there is no cap that the authority is working to. However, if it goes above the level that the government identifies as being excessive, then a referendum has to be held. And it's a very simple referendum that asks the taxpayer if they're happy to pay additional more than 2%, as it is at the moment, or not. So representations can be made in the lead up, but the ballot paper, if you like, is very clear, yes or no. Just doing a little bit of research, there's only one referendum that's been carried out in recent times on a relatively related service, and that's Bedfordshire Police. That cost £600,000 to run, and that was a cost to the police authority. And there was no success because the community said no. So the risk that we carry as an organisation is if we chose to go to referendum and the community said no, then there's a significant cost attached, and there's no guarantee of success. So I think it's important to note, because the paper talks about £1.1 million of deficit. I think it's really important that everyone understands that is for this year only. So we currently have a £1.1 million deficit as a minimum, because we've anticipated 2% increase. We were very clear, myself and the chair, when we went to the consultation meetings in London with the NJC, the employers. We were very clear that Cambridgeshire Fire could not afford more than 2% as an increase. We wanted to, absolutely we do. We believe that our staff should be paid in accordance with the cost of living, absolutely. But the stark reality is we couldn't afford any more than 2%. Unfortunately, the minimum level we are now looking at is a 5% increase. And taking that into account, along with all the other inflationary pressures we have, this year, we're facing a £1.1 million deficit in our budget. So at the moment, we've spent some considerable time, and I know the chair has, myself has, we've written to our MPs on a number of occasions. We've written to the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities to explain our financial position. And we've received a number of responses to that. And we know that there's some conversations ongoing about the level of council tax that Fire and Rescue Services will be able to levy next year. So what's the ceiling above which it becomes excessive? We have no guarantees or responses to that at the moment. And I can't give you any sense of whether we'll be successful or not at this time. But we are very much keeping our ears to the ground, trying to make the connections with those, with the department, because it's DLUC, that's where the money comes from, in effect. So our grant funding comes from them, and the council tax precept levels are set through DLUC. So that's where we're focusing our efforts. And we spent some time talking to Home Office as well. They understand our position. They are supportive of us, but of course they don't hold the purse strings. So if we move on to section 7, And as I said earlier, this is not something that we've only been doing for the last few months. This has been ongoing for 10 years. It's had a number of iterations. And since early this year, we tasked all of our heads of group, all of our management team to go through their individual departments and work out how they would downsize them in increasing levels of impact to the point where they would then not be able to maintain our statutory functions across all of the areas of prevention, protection and response. So that work's been done. It's gone through a number of challenge processes. So it wasn't just accepted at face value. It was challenged. It's been challenged by certainly by myself, John and Matthew. And then as a team, the Chief Officers Advisory Group, we have come up with a prioritised list of how we would accommodate any reductions that we have in funding over the coming months and years. I think it's really important to note that last year we had an unfunded pay increase. So I know it seems a long time ago, but those people will recollect that the Chancellor at the time, Rishi Sunak, announced that public sector workers would have a pay freeze last year. But the Fire and Rescue Service employers offered a 1.5% pay rise. So we were anticipating 0%, but we had to fund a 1.5%. As it happened, we'd raised 2% in council tax, and we had a number of things that we were looking to do to improve the level of service. So we had a very good look around the business, and we managed to find the cost of that, which is £375,000 from our revenue budget. So a significant sum. It enabled us to pay the pay rise and still maintain some of the improvements we were looking to do. Clearly, that puts us in a slightly more difficult position because we stripped out £375,000 last year, along with previous savings. You'll see in section 7.21, 2 and 3 how we made the savings. So it was through reducing a number of posts across our professional support service. So if I now move on to section 8, and so there is a very specific list, much more detailed list that we have, which I wouldn't be sharing at this point in time. And the reason for that is because we don't know what the future financial situation will be. And of course, this is really difficult stuff that we're talking about here because it relates to people and their jobs, not just in one section, but the whole of the organisation, particularly if we find that there's no flexibility next year, because that £1.1 million, if nothing changes for next year, rises by an additional £1.3 million. So if we have another 2% increase excessive council tax rise limit next year, and we have another minimum of 5% pay increase next year, and we're looking at over another £1 million. So that puts us in a very tricky position, and it will involve people's jobs across the service, inevitably. So what we've done is we've pulled them together, and we've talked about the impacts on professional support side, operational support side, and operations. And I think it's really important to bear in mind when you look at the impact, so impact 1, 2, 3, and 4 that are detailed within this paper, to cast your mind back to the earlier conversation and section 4 that reminds us there are 11 areas against which we are judged, and we are expected to be good across all of those areas. And those areas relate to the whole of our business. So that's all of the way we deliver protection, prevention, response services. So under impact 1, what we're saying is that there are a number of things that we've already started to remove from the budget. So we're talking here about £250,000 worth of savings. A lot of those we're already taking and putting aside ready to make savings if we need to. They are easier, but they will start to impact on our performance as an organisation, and we will, I suspect, we'll see our performance stagnating in terms of the requirements of the inspectorate. because it will be hard to maintain our flexibility and our proactivity as an organisation with significantly less funds. We move into impact 2, and that's where we continue to have that downwards impact on our performance across the piece. But at that point, we are then starting to lose staff through natural wastage, and the paper outlines the number of people that we would see at that level. Level 3, we then move into redundancy as well, and you'll see there's not a huge amount that we can achieve at those levels. Once we hit level 4, we are looking at redundancies, and we are looking at impacts on our ability to deliver the service. So that's when we will absolutely start to see a decline in the performance that we have as an organisation. As an aside, I attended a meeting this week that was hosted by Her Majesty's Inspectorate to talk about the current inspection process, and I did raise a question at that meeting, and the question was, how will you take into account reducing budgets in fire and rescue services when you're looking at performance and your expectations of those fire and rescue services? The response that came back was the bar will not be lowered, but the narrative contained within the report will reflect the situation. So what we took from that was, if we're expected to be good and a certain standard is required from that, and we can't be because we don't have the resourcing to do that, that will be recognised within the report. So that's actually a positive position, because it will help us to demonstrate that as a service that's good across the piece, if our performance declines, we can then evidence why that decline's happened. And then that gives those people who have the power to make decisions about how we're funded the choice about how they wish to fund us moving forwards. I'm not suggesting it will change it. I just think it helps to provide the evidence to demonstrate our need as an organisation. So, as I said, impact 4 is where it starts to get more difficult. I haven't included level 5, and that's where the impacts on our ability to deliver a service across the piece start to be impacted significantly. We do have that available, but at this point in time, until we are clear about what the financial situation is, we'll be moving forwards, then it wasn't my intention to bring that forward. I guess the last thing I would say is, so at the moment, this is a financial business continuity plan. And the point of it is to demonstrate that we are prepared. And we have done a lot of work to identify how we would downsize the organisation. We do understand the financial situation we're in, and we're looking to see what that potential may be, and we're prepared for whatever comes forward. But right now, today, we do not know what that situation will be, which is why I'm not asking members to make any decisions today. I'm just asking members to note the fact that as officers, we're in a position where we're prepared. As soon as we know what the situation is, we will come back to you with a full and definitive list of where we as officers would advise that the authority looks to downsize in order to meet any financial challenges, if that happens, because there is a potential that we might get full flexibility in our ability to raise council tax, and we would then be able to overcome the position we're in. I think that's probably me done, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that very clear explanation of the very detailed thinking process that's gone on in this effort to be prepared, although there are no matters for decision today. Before I open the item for debate, I'd like to invite Mark Harris, a fire service employee and FBU representative, to present a public question to the committee. Mr. Harris, you're very welcome to come and sit there. May I explain that you've got up to 3 minutes to make your point or ask your question. It's got to be about something that's on the agenda, And after the chief officer, fire officer responds to you, you'll be invited to go back to your seat. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, councillors. I'll speak to you today as my capacity as a fire brigades union official. I, like each of you, am an elected official appointed by the members I represent, which is 95% of whole-time firefighters, station commanders, group commanders, as well as on-call firefighters, control room staff, and more. I ask that while I highlight concerns in this financial business continuity plan, that you think of your constituents, whose views you represent, and think about what they would say about these proposals. I'd like to start by welcoming the Chief's recent statement in recognition that the Fire and Rescue Service needs investment to stabilise more than a decade's worth of reduction in funding from central government. We have consistently remained one of the leanest services in the UK, and however applaudable this achievement is, it isn't sustainable and cannot continue. This document mentions a few times the cost of living pay awards and appears to suggest it's an either or situation when it comes to firefighters' pay and a decent fire and rescue service provision. This notion is entirely wrong. We need a properly funded fire and rescue service, and that involves fairly paid professional firefighters and enough resources to deal with modern challenges. I don't want to go into pay too much, but to put the current situation into perspective, for a firefighter who joined in 2009, and there are many others that joined before then, if their wage had risen at the same rate as inflation, they would have earned an additional £55,407 over 13 years. That's more than £4,200 lost each year just because of inflation. Almost all firefighters are now forced to have second or third jobs on top of their demanding 42-hour working weeks. And despite this, some staff are still forced to use food banks and are at real risk of losing their homes due to spiralling costs. Surely you can all agree this isn't acceptable and definitely not in keeping with CAMSFire's vision of putting people at the centre of everything we do, or the HMI's criteria of people, which asks, how well does the service look after their people? This document also suggests how it might try to maintain a sufficient level of service should funding not be available. There are 5 levels of impact, 4 of which are detailed in that document. There's simply not enough time to go through each one, but it's clear as day to see that every single one of the reductions highlighted will impact our ability to provide a level of service that we should, a level that residents of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough have come to expect, a service that these residents, including myself and you, pay for through tax, which is increasing every year. Yet this plan would have us pay more but receive less. We have a growing county with more domestic and commercial buildings than ever before, with an ageing population that requires more of our assistance than most, with an increase in attendance times, and during the summer we declared multiple major incidents because we didn't have sufficient resources to cope. These seasonal extremes are becoming the norm. Yet this plan is suggesting we cut fire stations, cut more firefighters and staff from all areas of the service. Since 2010, CAMSFire has already seen a 20% reduction in the operational workforce. And right now, there is a real need for a properly funded fire and rescue service. Central government and local government authorities are responsible for funding. They are also equally responsible for any deficiencies in the fire and rescue service due to lack of sufficient funding. So my question is really, would you tell your constituents, your friends, your family, your children, you agreed to remove these fire stations, have less firefighters in the county, and essentially increase their risk of harm? I'm speaking for the 350 plus members of the CAMS FBU, and I'm positive each of their answers would be no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Chris, would you like to respond to the points made?
Thank you, Chair. To be fair, I think it's a very fair statement. There's not too much I would say. We might disagree over a couple of the issues raised. For example, 20% reduction, we actually reduced our operation established in the whole time by 14%, but the rest I think is more to do with the fact that we struggle to maintain an on-call service. So yeah, our on-call service is reducing. So the point about the summer, we didn't actually run out of resource, but we came very, very close to that, and which is why we implemented our degradation plan for the organisation, which highlights when we go into really tricky situations. And I think we were in what we term as black, so similar to the ambulance service. We got into a position of being black, which is worse than red, on at least 2 or 3 occasions. And I do remember some calls on one afternoon when we were down to our last couple of fire appliances, and we were effectively hoping that we didn't have any more calls because we weren't sure we'd be able to deal with them. So I totally agree with that. And none of the points that are raised in here are done lightly. I've highlighted very clearly that this isn't just about our front line. It's also about our prevention, our protection resources as well. The point made about pay, absolutely. It's my belief that all members of staff should be able to rely on an increase in their pay that means that it keeps up with inflation. Absolutely. We do have a stark reality, though. As a service, we can only afford to pay from the money that we're given. And if that money isn't enough, then we have to make difficult choices. So it's not just firefighters. And the point raised around firefighters having around about £5,000 a year less than they would have done if they'd got real terms increases. Absolutely, that's correct as well. I've seen the stats. I agree with them. But the same actually stands for the rest of the people who work for the fire and rescue service. And my view is every single one of them is worth an increase. Every single one of them deserves to retain their position. I don't look to do any of the things that are in this paper lightly. It's a very difficult position to be in from a professional standpoint, having seen an organisation go from being in a fairly tricky position to being one of the most well-regarded services in the country. Yeah, it's a really challenging position to be in. And anything we can do to lobby, to raise awareness beyond this room, certainly up to government, I would welcome. And it's certainly something that we've been trying very hard to do. The reality is, though, we have to be prepared for any eventuality. And this paper, I guess, highlights that we are prepared. And it also highlights there are some very difficult decisions that will have to be made should the financial position dictate that those decisions need to be made. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I open the debate, please? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Notwithstanding the Chief's introduction, it's the most difficult his experience for all those many years. And it's been a continuation of a process and not the end. We all acknowledge that. We also acknowledge there are so many unknowns and it leaves things so much up in the air and difficult for our staff. And I believe 2 of the biggest hurdles we've got to overcome before we can move on will be the national budget later on in this month, because the Chancellor is making all sorts of noises about the public sector, and also the grant announcement next year. Until we've got those out of the way, we just do not know how we can move forward. And I'd like to make a couple of observations and then put forward an amendment to the recommendations. I'd like to say that there should be no use of reserves for any shortfall in balancing the books. Our reserves are very low. In fact, I'd say they're getting almost dangerously low, and you can only use them once. I'd also like to say that any final plan that comes forward once we've got the unknowns out of the way should go through our overview and scrutiny process before it comes to the full Fire Authority, because I think most members here would be inclined to follow a recommendation from overview and scrutiny once we know that they've really gone over all the issues facing them with a fine Toothcombe. My amendment would be to the recommendation in item 212, after the words staff redundancies or reductions in the operational arena, brackets, staff, premises, equipment, close brackets. Now, the reason we're proposing that amendment is that we send a clear message that at this stage, the operational part of our service is absolutely the last to go place. And we will only look at it and indeed make any changes there if it is the only option. And by putting this amendment in, I believe it sends a fairly clear message and trying to give some reassurance to our operational staff. And while I've got the floor, can I thank Mark Harris for his balanced and well-presented case on behalf of his membership and indeed the wider community. We do understand the points that you're making, and equally, I think you do understand that the Fire Authority is also in between a rock and a hard place. At the end of the year, preparing a budget for next year, we've got to make it balanced. And I'm trying to give you some reassurance that the operational area is the last to go place. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. And I think, we all echo your comments, observations at the end that this is a really difficult situation, and we don't disagree with the points that you're making. And indeed, we've been trying very hard to find ways forward. And it's not over yet, but it is important to be prepared. May I, before I open up to other questions or observations, may I just ask Councillor Reynolds to just repeat the amendment? So it's the note the service will immediately.
Certainly, Madam Chairman. 212, after the final word redundancies,
yeah,
or reductions in the operational arena, bracket, staff, premises, equipment, close brackets. And that would be my amendment.
Right. And that's an amendment you're proposing. Thank you. So before I invite someone to second that, could I possibly ask the financial officer or the chief fire officer, please, to comment on whether that amendment, how much of a change that amendment would be to what you were proposing originally?
Thank you, Chair. I think the recommendation in 2.12 was really just brought forward to highlight the fact that we're already making savings and we've already taken a fair number. And actually, if you look through the paper, you'll see we've already taken things out. So, for example, if I just run back through 7.22, station commander post is reduced to watch commander and a reduction in contracted hours. We also taken out of breathing apparatus manager, water and hydrants officer. So I suppose my concern with the recommendation is it's hard to pin down what we should and shouldn't be doing. And the reality is we do have to make the savings. We need to get on with it because we may have only until April to do so. I think the reassurance I'd give back to members is we wouldn't be making anyone redundant unless we came back to you with a full, clear plan of what we're going to do. That's our intention as officers. The point about operational savings, I'll be honest. I think, and it's something I've tried to measure on. We do need to balance the savings we may need to make against the whole of our service, not just the operational side, because there is, and as Appendix 1 will point out, you'll see there's a wide range of things that we're expected to, by law, to be good at. And so what that means is we do have to make decisions. So if you look at this paper talks, I believe, about a number of on-call stations. No, I mean, going back to the statement by the Mark Harris, do I want to close any on-call stations? No. but I have to balance that against the impact of doing that, against the impact of doing other things. The reality of some of our on-call stations is they really do struggle with providing crews, particularly during the day when we're busy. So we can utilise the crews that are left, but not to mobilise fire appliances with. So in balancing a decision about retaining them against doing other things that will have a greater level of impact elsewhere, I wouldn't be able to reassure you that my advice would be to protect the stations at all costs. In fact, it wouldn't be. I think we will have to, well, my recommendation to members will have to be a bit more balanced in the way we do that, and we have to recognise that this is a service that provides prevention, protection and response, not just response. So, you know, it's members' decisions, but I guess my view would be we wouldn't be making any changes that involve redundancy unless we were to come back to members. And certainly our ambition from day one back in 2010 was to protect the front line, and we've been successful in doing that so far. But as I've said on record, there comes a point when efficiencies become cuts and it becomes unavoidable. And I think we're sort of heading towards that position unless the financial situation changes.
Thank you. Before I
Sorry,
just,
Chair, I think.
yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back on Councillor Reynolds' point around reserves, absolutely, I wouldn't be advocating using our general reserve any further, which is obviously the amount that we set aside for spate conditions and those unforeseen events. Absolutely not. But what we did do, and we agreed it, or this authority agreed it earlier in the year, was to set aside £1 million for this type of event. So it's an earmarked reserve that actually we use to transition. So in terms of the changes that hopefully we won't have to make, if we do have to make, we give ourselves time by utilising that amount of money. And I don't believe that fetters the financial position of this authority, because we will still be retaining our general reserve at the level I believe we need it to be.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm still on the point of clarifying the amendment, I'm afraid, which is because my reading of the amendment, Councillor Reynolds, and it might have been helpful to have had this notice of this before, is that it doesn't actually, it's just adding, it's if you like, clarifying what the original proposals are in the first place. So it's not actually changing anything, it's perhaps expanding on it. Is that your reading? Or are you actually suggesting that we change what the plan is?
Thank you for that clarification. That is indeed correct. It's not changing anything, but it's clarifying. And as a fire authority, we view that the reductions of any operational area is to be the absolutely last resort. And hearing the impassioned plea from the union representative, from what we'll know, there is a lot of uncertainty among our staff, and we would like to give them some sort of assurance, not guarantees, assurances, that that would be absolutely the last thing that we would do. We'd like to actually send that message clear to the chief and everybody else when they're looking at these things, that that's got to be the bottom of the list.
Thank you. I think it has been clear in everything that what the Chief Officer, Fire Officer said is that these sort of fundamental decisions will be taken by the Fire Authority and not in advance of those decisions. If you accept that reading of it.
I do, but I'm not sure how it's going to be interpreted in the minutes, long as it's worded in a way, long as there's agreement with my amendment. There may not well be. That we view as a matter of course for this round of cost reduction is that operational arenas should not be touched at all. That's the last possible resort. As long as that's clear, then I'm happy.
Right. I think it's quite difficult not having had it beforehand, because one person's operational arena is another person's detailed information. So I'm not, I think I've accepted your assurance that what you're doing is not changing anything fundamental, but just making it clearer. But may I move to Councillor Kindersley?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if there is a different way of approaching this, because I quite understand what Councillor Reynolds is trying to do, but I think it's too late. We are being asked to note that the service will immediately commence making savings that do not include compulsory staff redundancies. And everything that Councillor Reynolds suggests, which is staff, premises and equipment, has actually already commenced. And the Chief Fire Officer has given us a very detailed report which lists what has already gone and what would go should we remain in the position that we are in right now, which is a deficit of £1.1 million in this financial year. I understand Councillor Reynolds' position on this, but I think there might be a more constructive way forward, which is this, that instead of that amendment, that we agree, and I haven't obviously talked to anybody about this, so this might go down in flames as well, that Overview and Scrutiny Committee be summoned to examine the financial situation as it develops on an ad hoc basis to which all members of the Fire Authority are invited. The reason I suggest this is because it gives us an easy to organise committee which can look in very close detail at what the Chief Fire Officer and Mr. Warren propose in the light of the various decisions that government is about to be taking. So on the 17th of November, there is going to be a financial statement. You know, it would be sensible for us possibly to be able to meet in the days after that to discuss how that impacts this financial business continuity plan. Likewise, there's going to be decisions made by the Department of Levelling Up, presumably, over the next couple of months. It would be, you know, we need to be able to meet to discuss how that affects the financial business continuity plan. But the bottom line is that if nothing changes from today in terms of our budget, all of these things that are being proposed will happen, give or take. And that is the stark reality of the situation that we face. And that is why the Chief Fire Officer is saying that this is the most dire position that he's ever faced on a professional basis. And so we need to be quick on our feet, and we need to be quick thinking about what happens in the next 6 months. So that would be my suggestion, Chair, and I'm very happy to put that forward as an alternative. I think from the perspective of what Councillor Reynolds is trying to achieve, it's a constructive way forward, which will give us an opportunity to discuss the various positions that the Chief Fire Officer and his team are going to find themselves in.
Thank you. I think that is actually a pragmatic offer, which allows us to be responsive and flexible and accountable at the same time. Would we consider that as an amendment?
I'm not sure, Chair, how you wish to play that. Councillor Reynolds, I'm sure will have a seconder for his amendment. I don't know whether I do, not having discussed it, but it would seem to me that it covers all of Councillor Reynolds's concerns, but doesn't box in any of the senior management team, as it were.
Would you like to? Councillor Reynolds.
Yes, Madam Chairman. I think to make life easier, we ought to just deal with my amendment first, and it either stands or it falls. I appreciate Councillor Kindersley. He always comes up with wise words and invariably a sensible way forward. And I'd like to think Scrutiny are going to get hold of this anyway. So thank you for that offer. But I think now the amendment's on the table, if there is a seconder, we'll go through that and then move on. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the Chief Fire Officer would like to say something, and then we can perhaps have some advice.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess all I would say as the Chief is I need to be clear about what members are asking. If members are saying, would like to say that there can be no recommendations for operational cuts, that's potentially an issue, because as your advisor, I can only advise you what makes sense against the backdrop of our legal requirement. So if members are saying that we should come forward with our advice as officers, which will include what it needs to include, and then we can have the debate about why we've come to that decision and whether it's the right decision to make, then I have no issues with that. I think it becomes more of a problem if we are being fettered in what we can and can't recommend.
With respect, we're not suggesting or guiding you on what you can recommend. You've made recommendations, we've listened to them, we'll come to our own view on them, and it's our opinion that at this stage, operational arena should not be touched. It can be on the list, but right at the very, very, very bottom. So we're not ignoring your recommendations, but we are giving you guidance, shall we say, what we would like to see. And it may not be supported, but that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you for that. I mean, that does actually completely clarify that it is a change to what is in the report. And as Councillor Kindersley has said, some of these changes are taking place. They are not compulsory redundancies. That has been a commitment that no change of that nature and no full implementation of the savings plan would be made until the full requirement is known. But I think what the amendment proposed, we have a proposer, is making, what is intended is to tie the hands of any further cuts in advance of knowing what the full cuts are, savings that are to be made short of redundancies. So at this point, may I ask Monitoring Officer, please, to provide a bit of advice here, because we have effectively one amendment on the table and potentially an alternative amendment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In the normal course of events, you would take one amendment at a time once it's seconded and debate that. Just looking at the amendment that's proposed by Councillor Reynolds, I think the difficulty, as the Chief Fire Officer was saying, is that he's reported to you that there are some efficiency savings already being made. Now, it is not clear to me whether those would include things which might be categorized as being in the operational area. That's a very wide definition, so it's difficult to know what exactly that means, and whether the Chief Fire Officer is already making efficiency savings around staff, such as vacant posts or premises or equipment, and making efficiencies within those budgets. I think without allowing the Chief Fire Officer and Matthew perhaps to go away and explain exactly what they are doing and have some more clarity, I think it would be very difficult for that amendment to effectively tie the hands of a programme that is already underway. So that's one thing. Can I suggest that if that amendment is seconded and voted on and is carried, that it is paused until Chief Fire Officer can come back and report on what that means for his current efficiency programme. That otherwise the risk is that this is tying the hands of the Chief to manage his budget, which he must properly be allowed to do. In terms of Councillor Kinderley's proposed amendment, obviously neither of these have been seconded yet, but certainly the Fire Authority can refer anything to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and it's completely within the terms of reference to review and scrutinise strategic decisions. And if this isn't a strategic decision, I don't know what is. So that might be an inroad into setting up ad hoc meetings, which could be agile. The quorum is low enough for that to meet regularly, with the invitation of all members to attend as they can, and to perhaps get this level of clarity that is needed. So just from an operational perspective, I think if Councillor Reynolds' amendment goes through, then it might be a pause on implementing that until the Chief can come back. If on the other hand, you wanted to look at Councillor Kindersley's amendment, to refer matters to the overview and scrutiny, that might be an appropriate place for the types of things Councillor Reynolds wants clarifying to be clarified. So it may be that you want to consider that amendment first and then discuss the scope of Councillor Reynolds' amendment. I hope that helps with the procedural way forward.
So thank you. Well,
Can I make a very quick suggestion?
Yes,
perhaps?
please.
Perhaps Councillor Reynolds' amendment, just for the purposes of getting this debate moving, perhaps his amendment could say no further efficiencies in operation. I can't remember the exact words of your amendment, but perhaps that would get around the stuff has already happened issue. You could say further, we can then have a debate on that amendment, deal with that, second amendment, deal with that, full debate.
I'm not sure that's particularly helpful because that stops it as of today, and then it prevents any further decisions being made in the next few days and so on. So
we can have a valid debate about whether it's a good idea or not, but I think that that is something that could be agreed by the committee if it so wished to, without perhaps running into some of the issues that the monitoring officer was advising.
Thank you. Well, I think that's possibly something that you would assume in your amendment. But if we perhaps take the monitoring officer's advice, and we will look at Councillor Kindersley's suggestion amendment. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Goodliffe, thank you very much. So what we'll do is we'll debate that, we'll vote on it, and then we'll, if we need to, we will look at your amendment.
Speaking of point of order, I'm sorry, that seems to be totally back to front. I understand what the monitoring officer said, but there is the first proposal for an amendment was made by, from this side, has already been made by Councillor Reynolds, hasn't yet been said, you haven't yet sought a seconder. You can't now go to another amendment, proposed amendment, and take that first. If the first amendment fails and falls, then of course you can move to a second amendment, another amendment, and even a further amendments if you want that. They don't need necessarily to be contrary to the first one. So I'm suggesting that as a point, the point of process, you take a seconder for the first amendment, we debate that amendment, and then take a vote on it, and then come to, if Councillor Kindersley still wishes to propose another amendment, we take that in due course. But this is, we seem to be going around the houses on something here, which I find very confusing and unusual.
Thank you. Well, I think that on second thoughts, we may have slightly amended advice.
So just to clarify, what I was proposing in the interests of ensuring that both sides of the argument could be properly put to the fire authority. It was simply whether Councillor Reynolds would be content for Councillor Kindersley's amendment to go first, so that a route to discussing the issues was established first, and then what was discussed would come forward as a second amendment. But I totally accept procedurally, if Councillor Reynolds wishes to have his amendment heard first, it came first, it should you should call for a seconder first. It was just a practical suggestion, if that was acceptable.
Thank you to all those who have contributed. I'm surprised that such a straightforward amendment has caused so much debate. I'm inclined to actually leave this on the table and see if it gets any support so that we can move on. Councillor Kindersley's suggestion is a good idea, but it should go through overview and scrutiny anyway as a matter of process. So, Madam Chairman, I'll be grateful if we could deal with my amendment, see if there's support for it. If there isn't, then we'll just move on naturally anyway.
Thank you. I think we're all agreed on that. Let's have a seconder, and Councillor Maguire.
Chairman, I would like to second Councillor Reynolds' amendment, but and explain my reasons for doing so, which prior to this latest discussion was the fact that it was in the context of the way the 2.1.2 recommendation is made. It says we'll immediately commence making savings. So when I consider that is different from considering the proposed, when we come to set a budget, given what we don't yet know in terms of settlement, and it may be necessary. We've already heard some of the options being proposed by the Chief Fire Officer as to what we might have to do. It's the fact that it's these immediately commence making savings that gave me concern in terms of the operational side of matters. So it's not just a case of do not include compulsory staff redundancies, but and it should include these additional things in terms of the potential operational savings, because as the Chief Fire Officer has frequently mentioned during his part of the debate was his making recommendations. Now, there's a difference between making recommendations to the Fire Authority, which I would support the principle of, and it was already discussed in terms of overview and scrutiny, which Councillor Kindersley has mentioned, but was also mentioned during the debate by Councillor Reynolds about the need for it to come to overview and scrutiny, or considered come to overview and scrutiny. And there's a difference between, as I say, making recommendations to the authority as opposed to commencing making savings. So there are certain things which are delegated to Chief Fire Officer and he can do under the current arrangements, as opposed to any additional savings that he might recommend ought to be made. And that is the reason I chose to second Councillor Reynolds. And I think that is why, Chairman, we should take that recommendation on board. And I hope we would have the support of the Fire Authority. Then I think it would be not unreasonable. And I would certainly want to support any suggestion that it comes to overview and scrutiny as a suggestion of a further amendment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Goodliffe.
Thank you, Chair. I think whilst I understand the sentiment behind the amendment, I think my biggest issue is we have 1.1 million that we need to find this year. So the reason behind all of this paper is because we are already looking at this deficit and we are having to make changes. I don't think anyone in this room would want to make any reduction to the services, and we have an amazing fire and rescue service staffed by amazing people, but we are in an absolute stuck situation. I think this amendment to go to that, it would hamstring or kneecap the fire and rescue service. It would mean that we cannot look at the entire service. It would mean that, yes, response would be key, and obviously it is key, but we also have a duty for protection and a duty for prevention, and we have to look at the service in its entirety. I think this amendment changes the entire paper, and is therefore not just an amendment, but an utter change. I'd say if you don't agree with the paper, then vote against the paper. But I cannot support this amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. I just looking through the comments in regards to the words that we've added. And I'm going back to the recommendations, and it does say, note the service will not immediately commence making savings that do not include compulsory. So now, Chief Fire Officer has given us his impact 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Redundancies all come in later on. So I don't see what this adds to that. And for me, it's semantics. If we'd done this 3-4 months ago, maybe, but as a responsible authority, we are looking in the future as to what with the position we may be in. And whilst I sympathise with the comments that would be made by Councillor Reynolds, I just think that everything we will do will come back to the overview and scrutiny, and it will come back to the Fire Authority, so we can actually have that discussion then. So for that reason, I don't want to hamper the Chief Fire Officer in any way. And for me, that's the bottom line here. I also don't want to see anyone made redundant either. So if we can find money in other ways, we will. And we've had that assurance from the Chief Fire Officer as well. And for me, I'm finding it difficult to support the proposal at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be supporting this amendment. I want to give just a very quick example to illustrate why. I think if, let's say tomorrow a vacancy were to arise naturally on the operational side because a member of staff left or retired, this amendment would force the fire chief and his officers to immediately rehire that post and not consider any alternatives. I think that would be daft. We're in a very fast-moving situation. We need to give our officers the capacity and the space to make sensible decisions, particularly around things like naturally rising vacancies, because that could mean that we avoid compulsory redundancies down the line, which nobody wants to see. So just as a specific example, I think it's important to reflect on just how tightly this would constrain their ability to make sensible choices that could, potentially, make more savings further down the line. So for that reason, I shall be opposing this amendment.
Thank you. Any other points to make? Would our monitoring officer like to speak?
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to just come in before you take the vote. I think there is we just need to be clear that this recommendation as amended doesn't fetter the Chief Fire Officer's operational powers and the budget that he has operational control over. So this should not be seen as a fetter on that, and I can see people nodding. So with that in mind, just to make it crystal clear, can I potentially propose some additional wordings to 2.1.2 so that where we get to note the service will immediately commence making savings, to add the words that fall within the Chief Fire Officer's delegated powers. So that means Chris can continue to exercise his delegated powers in terms of efficiencies as he normally would, but he wouldn't go beyond that. It's just as it's currently read could be seen to be a fetter on his delegated budget, which I'm sure nobody intended. But I think with those words, that would clarify that and stop any sort of constitutional problem between what the authority wants to see back and doesn't want spending on, and what the chief rightly can do within his delegated powers.
Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you for that suggestion. I've tried to resist being really blunt about this, but this is a report that has come to us effectively for information. We are being asked now to get involved in the operation of the fire service. That is not our business.
Thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
I tend to disagree with that. The fire authority is there to actually oversee the fire authority. Members decide with guidance from officers, but at the end of the day, members make decisions. And I'm very often wary of delegated powers, but in this case, I haven't got a problem with it. I really thought this was a straightforward amendment, sending a clear message that we know that there's going to have to be significant reductions in the budget, but it would be the members' view that the very last place we go to for those reductions would be the operational side. Now, that's what I firmly believe. If other people have a contrary view, then so be it, vote against it.
Right, last word, Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chairman. I feel I have to react to the point that Councillor Kindersley's just made. But first of all, let me say I would support the suggestion made by the monitoring officer, because we don't want to fetter the Chief Fire Officer in his managing the operational side of it. But let me make it quite clear. I've been involved with this fire service for over 30 years now. And unless something has changed and I've missed it, this fire authority is totally responsible for both sides of the fire service, including the operational side. Unlike the old police authority, and even now with the police commissioner, where the chief constable retains operational responsibility and the commissioner doesn't, that is not the case with the fire authorities, whether we like it or not. And I can see the monitoring officer is nodding agreement with that. So we do still have that operational responsibility. However, we do delegate to the chief fire officer the day-to-day running of the fire service. And I'm quite content with that. And I believe that the wording that has been suggested by the monitoring officer ensures that this immediately commencing making savings does not impinge on areas that the fire authority ought to be making a determination as part of its policy making process. That is all. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, let's take a vote on this. Sorry, Councillor Chris, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I'm not trying to get the last word. I just thought I'd say so. I think that makes entire sense. Just my concern in listening to the conversation is around exactly what Councillor McGuire just said. I've got delegated authority to run the service. I've never had a problem doing that, and I wouldn't like to see a decision coming forward that hampered that ability, particularly in light of the direction that we're moving in terms of things like the white paper, where there's much discussion around operational independence. I've always made it very clear to anybody who's asked me, and I have been asked by a number of people around my independence, and I've never had an issue with it because I've always felt very supported by the authority and able to make the right decisions and come to you at the right time and ask for your support in doing things. And that's never been an issue. So that's just my interest, is to make sure we are able to preserve that, because it puts us in a very good position as an authority to defend our position. Thank you.
Right, those in favour? Apologies.
Are we voting on Councillor Reynolds' amendment?
Yes, we are.
Unamended by the monitoring officer.
Could we have clarity on what we're actually, the wording of it? Because there's people watching online here and we need to be clear on what we're going to be voting on.
Thank you. If the monitoring officer could read out the amendment.
Yes, so the amendment would be to note, this is 2.1.2, to note that the service will immediately commence making savings that fall within the Chief Fire Officer's delegated powers that do not include compulsory staff redundancies or reductions in the operational areas of staff, premises or equipment.
Right, we're clear about the amendment. Thank you. And those in favour? Yeah, we do have a seconder, Councillor Maguire, yeah. Thank you. Those against? So it's a casting vote. So that amendment falls. Thank you.
Could I just have the actual, I appreciate saying it's full, could I just have the actual numbers?
There were 7 votes in favour, 7 against, and I believe the chair has exercised her casting vote.
That was why I raised it, Chairman. I didn't hear you.
Sorry.
Say that you were using your casting vote.
Sorry, thank you. Right, and then we have.
Chair, just can I clarify? When an amendment, does it not have to win the vote? Because it was equal, so it doesn't go through.
It was 7 for, 7 against, and the chairman has her casting vote, which tips it to 8 against.
I understand that part, but I always thought the amendment has to win, win outright. Yeah, get a majority. Or am I wrong?
Not within our constitution, Chairman. No.
While the monitoring officer is checking that, Have you found the answer?
Yes, so Chairman, in the event of a tied vote, the chair shall have the casting vote, which she has so cast.
Thank you. We have an alternative suggestion, which is that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is used as a effectively inviting all members, is able to do a rapid response in relation to our changing circumstances, and thus provide timely feedback to officers. Is that a view that is accepted by members? Do we need to vote on this? We can accept this.
I'd be personally happy for overview and scrutiny. I think that was also making. My concern is that I wasn't sure, but I think Councillor Kindley was suggesting ad hoc frequent meetings, and I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, or whether we should have it through our normal programme, because I don't think overview and scrutiny meets again until January.
And you said ad hoc.
So, yeah, but I'm just one close.
So, Chair, to clarify, I did mean on an ad hoc basis in order to respond to the various developments from central government. So, you know, obviously there are a number of days notice that have to be given on a statutory basis, but I think we can still manage to be, I think the word used was agile. I like to feel that I can still be agile, as I'm sure you'd like to feel that too when you back.
I'd love to remain agile.
Thank you. My thought about whether members were broadly happy with that is we don't necessarily need to formulate an amendment on that. We can just agree. We can just agree that that is the way forward. Matthew.
The only counter proposal, I suppose, and advice is that we have a Policy and Resources Committee in early December in terms of responding to the likely announcement, which will come at that point, and whether we use that date as a mechanism for inviting all members in to actually go through, obviously, what the latest position is.
Well, may we choose, Councillor Goodliff?
I'd be very happy to use that meeting for that purpose. I think that makes sense, and it's already in the diary and makes less of an impact on officers.
Yes, I think, well, I think that the spirit of what we want to do is clear, is that we want to be engaged in any decision making as rapidly as possible. If it turns out that the Overview and Scrutiny ad hoc meeting is the more timely, then let us do that. But if it can wait, if it's perhaps the time is right for the December meeting, Policy and Resources, let's do that there. And the commitment is to all members. Is that, and with that, may I take it that we are content to note the content of the report and note that the service is already making savings, but not in the sensitive areas of redundancies. Councillor Atkins.
Sorry, I've got no problem with agreeing recommendations. We haven't had much debate kind of on the rest of the report yet. And I wanted to make a few comments there, and I don't want to take up too much time, but is it acceptable for me to do that now?
Quite right. Yes, it is certainly acceptable.
I think what would be helpful, and I appreciate this is all being put together at high speed as events unfold, but particularly for when we look at this again, it sounds like in December. What I would find particularly helpful is the report talks about essentially the kind of business continuity over, say, 3 years. It's a little unclear as to what measures come into effect in which year and what assumptions we're using for whether the service will be sustainable in future years. That sounds like a very technical point, but I suppose my concern is that there's a way of approaching this, which is how do we get to next April? There's a way of approaching it, which is how do we get to April after that? But really, we should probably be looking at what will make this service sustainable, over, say, 1 to 3 years at least, and give an account some likely pressures that we're going to have. So, for example, obviously, we've had this unexpectedly large and in some ways very welcome pay rise of 5% when we only budgeted 2%. That only takes us for this year. Inflation doesn't look like it's going away. There are going to be calls for a significant pay rise in the next year as well. and we need to be thinking, I appreciate that there's active lobbying efforts going on, but I wouldn't want those only to be focused on the financial sustainability from here to April or the following April. It needs to be looking at a 3-year, 5-year timeline, and we need to kind of be engaging with that, although I appreciate it gets more uncertain as it goes on.
Thank you, Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted just to take the opportunity to again thank Mr. Harris for his question, which the answer to his actual question, which is, do you want to go out and have to tell the people who elect you about cuts to the service, is no. And so I think that, probably speaking for all of us, we will be doing whatever we can so that we're not in a position where we have to go to colleagues to say, thank you very much, bye-bye. And it is on that I really wanted to speak, which was that Mr. Harris did make the point about local government, but also about national government, which is somewhat an elephant in this particular room just at the minute. And you'll have seen in paragraph 6.5 that there is obviously a slight glimmer of hope if the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities follows the same process that it followed last year, in which the bottom lowest council tax raising fire authorities were allowed to raise by more than the 2%. So we're in that potential ballpark now. So that's the glimmer of hope, but it's slightly tarnished by the fact that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has talked about eye-wateringly difficult financial decisions that need to be taken. So I would ask those members opposite, whose MPs, with the exception of one, represent Cambridgeshire residents, to use whatever heft and power of persuasion they have with their own government to try and make the point that, if the government proceeds the way it appears to be going, doesn't give us any opportunity to rescue our finances, then, they will be, I suspect, punished by the electors at the next general election for not least having potentially closed local fire stations. And I'm sure that must resonate even with government ministers.
Thank you, Councillor Slatter.
Thank you. And also, to return to trying to answer Mr. Harris's question, I am quite prepared to stand on doorsteps talking to residents and listening to residents. We're all residents. We have neighbours, we have family who are equally badly paid and caught in public pay freeze gaps. But I'm quite prepared to talk to a nurse on a doorstep and say, this is actually a very good value for money insurance policy that you would, you can buy into with an added council tax. And I'm sorry we have to charge it, but we will, but with a pretty clear conscience, because we know it is good value for money compared with what they could lose in the way of property or even life if we don't have the services there. So I am happy to justify an increase in the council tax on the doorstep with whoever. But I certainly also hope that council tax is a clumsy tax, and the central government is in a better position, I believe, to help with this situation.
Thank you. Matthew, would you like to respond?
Yeah, just on Councillor Atkin's point around medium-term financial planning. So that was part of my thinking in terms of obviously coming to the Policy and Resources Committee in December, because the other side of this particular scenario is actually how we plan for the longer term. So actually what we're also building is, if you like, scenarios around what council tax increases might look like, what grant increases might look like, and what pay awards might look like. And there is a number of scenarios. So actually really to present the whole story to members in terms of the what ifs. Hopefully, by that point, we'll have more information, but just to give the reassurance that absolutely we are looking at the medium term as well.
Thank you very much. Members, do I take it then, having had the discussion, having had thoughts about amendments and so on, Are we happy to note the content of the report and service? Yes, thank you very much. We are going to take a short comfort break now, 10 minutes. All right, thank you very much. Let us recommence. Our next substantive item, I'm proposing that we move it to a future meeting, just in view of time, and of course we don't have sufficient information about our financial situation. So I'm proposing to move that forward to a future date. We do have to deal with it this year, but we can deal with it at another meeting. Acceptable? Thank you. Next agenda item is our revenue and capital budget monitoring report. Matthew, assume we've read the report, but would you like to mention a couple of points?
Yes, so just a couple of points. I suppose it looks very healthy at the moment. As you will appreciate, nothing in terms of pay inflation has been applied to the expenditure figures as it stands at the moment. Just one figure just to point out really, and it's on the appendix. At the end, it's the line which says local government employees, but context. So it's showing an £87,000 underspend at the moment. But bear in mind, I now know that the additional burden that's going to have to go into that budget is another £200,000 effectively, or just short of that, with about 140 of it being additional pressure over and above what we budgeted, which is the Green Book effectively pay award that has now been agreed. So again, context-wise, that is then going to be, obviously, that's one line. We'll have the Grey Book award at some point once it's agreed, and then we have senior managers and such like as well to apply. So there's a lot of catching up to do on this budget as it stands at the moment. But that's really the key point, without labouring it too much, because clearly all we talk about at the moment is inflation and cost of living increases.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Matthew? No, all straightforward. Thank you very much. So we note the position on revenue and capital expenditure. Yes. Thank you. Moving on to the next item, Matthew, I believe it's you again to update us.
It is, thank you. So just in terms of where we are with particular estate projects, so the new Huntingdon Fire Station and Training Centre is practically complete. We expect to take ownership of the building next week. There has been some last minute snagging, as you'd expect on a new build of that size, which we are looking to resolve, and we hope that they will be resolved this week or early next. And then we will take ownership of the building. And it is a quite wonderful building. If any of you have had the opportunity, I've actually said to the chair that perhaps the next fire authority should be held at the new site, so everybody will see it in action. In terms of the sale of the current Huntingdon site, we are working with our district council colleagues in terms of pre-application advice. The latest advice we have is that whilst it's in a conservation area, they are looking at the design of the current the current proposal around residential is the predominant proposal, and it was looking to be quite dense to keep in line with other houses in the area. So that hopefully will maximise the value for us as we look to move to market over the last quarter of this financial year. St Neots, we're still working with the constabulary, and they are currently at procurement process getting quotes for how much it will cost to extend that building. What we do know is that they are quite high, the quotes, because of the obvious, without saying it, price inflation on building materials and such like. So that will need to go, will be a decision for the constabulary at the point they receive those quotes. St Ives, like with Huntingdon, we are working with our district council colleagues at Huntingdonshire to get pre-application advice of the art of the possible on that site, and that is being done in conjunction with the NHS, because they are looking to sell their health centre at the same time. So in theory, it opens up the whole site at St Ives, which will only be a positive and could hopefully add to the value of our piece of land as well. And again, that's not so urgent, so we're looking for for that advice to come in sometime early next year, I would imagine. In terms of Patworth and Camborne, we're operating from Camborne now, and members saw a paper back in June. In terms of the Patworth site, we are looking to go to auction in December. We were going earlier in the year as originally suggested, but actually there were some specific pre-sale site searches that had to be complete before we were able to go through the auction process. But that will happen in early December, and obviously I'll write back and report back to members and what we achieve through that process. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Any questions for Matthew? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the St Ives scenario, so could you give me a bit more information on it? It's the first time I've heard about the relocation of St Ives fire station. What is not appropriate with the existing site at the moment?
So the existing site is, it houses a number of functions, not just a fire appliance. It houses one fire appliance, but it also houses the occupational health unit. It has our secondary control function. Our secondary control function has moved or will move to Dogsthorpe when we go live with a new system. And our occupational health unit is moving to the new site at Huntingdon. So a lot of the site becomes effectively empty and really just excess that we don't need. So if we can hopefully sell the site, which I'm sure we'll be able to, and we relocate the fire appliance element to a unit, perhaps on the industrial area in St Ives, cut down our overheads and continue to deploy an operational response. Okay.
Thank you very much. Any other? Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you. Might be a bit too late to ask this question, but I will press on, in particular in relation to the Huntingdon site and planning consents. Is the proposal sufficiently large to require affordable housing? And if so, was there a discussion between the planning authority and us about key worker housing as opposed to specifically affordable housing? Because obviously, you know, firefighters are key workers.
So it's pre-application advice. So absolutely those conversations can still happen. We've got a meeting with them next week, so I'm more than happy to bring up the conversation.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. We're noting the report. And then our next item is the draft annual governance statement, which I believe is you as well, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this is something that is a requirement. We have to bring it every year under the Local Government Act, and really just sets out the arrangements that we have in place for governance and our controls. The appendix sets those out, and then there's effectively a review of how effective we've been. And the key elements are on page 5 of the appendix, on sort of page 127 of the pack, which highlights, if you like, the significant governance issues from last year and what we've done about them, and then those that are outstanding for the 21-22 financial year, which is what this governance statement refer to. And there's two elements: the sickness absence and asset and fleet management. Asset and fleet management, you'll see from the narrative that quite a significant amount of work has gone on, but for sickness absence, we are still going through the process of implementing a new sickness absence management process. So that will continue through this financial year, and then other considerations are listed below. But we've spoken about most of those, I think, in a lot of detail, either today or previously. So unless members have got any questions, I will leave it there.
Do we have any questions? Thank you. Are we happy to support the recommendation and publish this? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matthew. Our next item, I believe, is Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a report from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee asking for Fire Authority membership, the wider membership, to endorse a decision that was taken at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I should perhaps clarify the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee from which this item comes are also included on the agenda. I think to save confusion, it might have been easier if they'd been simply included as an appendix to this agenda item, because obviously we haven't had the subsequent meeting to agree the minutes yet. So there is a little bit of a hiccup process-wise, but essentially members will be aware that the Joint Consultative Committee has existed for a very long time, and for much of that time it has never met. And the reasons for that are well known to us all. And we were asked, in fact, we asked two of our members, Councillors Gowing and Maguire, to undertake a member-led review into what should we do with the Joint Consultative Committee. They came up, having done a great deal of work, may I say, for which we were very grateful. They came up with a number of proposals which are the Fire Authority as a whole is asked to endorse today. So effectively, that is that the Joint Consultative Committee is dissolved, and that a discussion takes place which would enable two-way communication between members and the representative bodies. And the way that was envisaged, I think, would be corporate communications between the chair and the vice chair of the Fire Authority with the previous members of the Joint Consultative Committee, the partners, representative bodies. Sorry, got there in the end. That was endorsed by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I hope that you will agree with that this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chairman, and I thank Councillor Kinsley for the report. At the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where the report was presented initially and the recommendation one was followed on from that. Can I just say that at that meeting, unfortunately, Deb Thompson, one of our officers, wasn't able to be at that meeting. So we were not able to thank her directly from personally, although we did thank her in the meeting. But Deb put in a great deal of effort on this review, and I know that Councillor Gowing feels the same as me. We're really extremely grateful for the amount of work that she did, particularly as it was a difficult period. We went through the COVID period, as well as all the consultation we did with the representative bodies. So I really want to ask that it be minuted that we show our appreciation. And in addition to that, as I say, the recommendation from ourselves was that we endorse the dissolution of the JCC. And I think as Councillor Kinsley probably has brought, the Overview and Scrutiny is actually asking, how we handle that communications with the representative bodies. And I'm sure, no doubt, in due course, something worthwhile will come out of it eventually. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and absolutely, we must minute those thanks. Any other points that members wish to make? No, are members happy to support the recommendation? Yep, thank you very much. And thank you very much for all the work that was done on that. It was a thorough piece of work. Right, agenda item 12, sustainable or sustainability strategy. I should say an update, a quick update from Matthew, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just keep it brief. I'm assuming you've all seen the footprint report, which effectively I promised that we would do last time. So there's some nice graphs on that report that effectively highlight where we have some particular challenges, should we say, in terms of our carbon footprint as it stands currently. And we're working with the Carbon Trust now to develop an action plan which will target or come up with options as to how we target and reduce our carbon footprint, with a view for getting to a point of net zero by 2030. So that's really a very brief update. Obviously, there's a lot of detail in there, but I'll bring further updates in the new year.
Any questions for Matthew? Councillor Kindersley.
He doesn't underestimate the challenge of what lies ahead of us.
Indeed. Thank you for that. And the report was really good to read, actually, very thorough. We're asked to note the report. Is everyone content to do that? Yeah. Councillor Gow. I thought you wanted to make a point, but you were just nodding in agreement. Thank you. We note the report. Item 13 and 14, it's Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, it's the schedule for next municipal year 2023 to 24. Basically follows the same pattern as this year. And I'll be sending those dates around to members to put in their diaries if members are happy with those dates. Did anyone have any questions to the chair? Thank you. And just very quickly on the appointments, the only change is that we've added a Labour substitute to the Performance Review Committee. I think we need to revisit all of the 3-member committees because they're based on the old proportionality. So we only had 2 subs, but that's sort of most keenly felt in Performance Review Committee, which meets most frequently. I'll also be removing JCC from that schedule. And there was just one more highlighted, which was flagged up at the end of the last meeting, I believe. And that's that Councillor Jamil is the chair's sub for the combined authority.
Thank you very much. And I believe Councillor Maguire wanted to ask something.
Chairman, yeah, I think it's an appropriate time to raise it, given our forward programme. Can I have an explanation, or authority have an explanation as to why we're meeting here as opposed to fire headquarters? And I'm looking also to the future when we move, will we be admitted? Because I'm sure no matter how generous Cambridgeshire County Council is, I doubt they're given this access to this building for nothing, but maybe they are. But given the overview and scrutiny met at fire headquarters recently, I couldn't see why we're not meeting. I wonder if we can have an explanation as to the rationale behind this meeting here today.
Thank you, Matthew.
It was originally started through COVID, Councillor Maguire, and now is the right time to review it. And actually, yes, you're right. We need to be taking advantage of our own premises again. So I think it's just a case of we'll liaise with Dawn and ensure that we use either the new Huntingdon site, as I mentioned earlier, or fire service headquarters.
I could just say that if I just follow up, I'm assuming you're saying that's because it was pre-booked during the period when it wasn't practical to use fire headquarters. Yeah. Because I would imagine, particularly today, and I know from some of the comments made by some of the people in this room, it might be warmer in fire headquarters.
Every little helps, Councillor Maguire, I think.
I think that's quite
air in here works, but
yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and it's certainly noted. I think there's quite a lot which is forward booked, so we can certainly take that away. Final agenda item is to note the draft minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. These are to note for the contents rather than to approve them per se. But are there any questions about it? If so, I understand Councillor Kindersley would like to answer them. No questions. Great, well, that concludes the meeting for today. Thank you everyone for attending and contributing. And the next scheduled meeting will be on the 10th of February next year. Thank you very much.
Chair, if anybody's planning to head home via the A1198, it is currently closed at Longstow.
Thank you. Duly warned. Thank you.